Dogs and cats have at least, hopefully, a wonderful, loving, caring owner, but Mother Nature doesn't. And so when animals become injured, they're on their own. They usually starve or die of secondary infection, unless they happen to meet up with a wildlife rehabilitator. So this is a red-tailed hawk. He was hit by a car and has a broken wing. One of my hobbies and passions is wildlife rehabilitation. This is Cordelia's pouch. Cordelia, are you a sleepy girl? Oh. I have been fascinated with nature and life since I can remember. I became a licensed wildlife rehabilitator when I was 14, and I knew that I would have a lifelong career helping animals. So when I was 14, I heard about a woman that had tremendous success with wildlife rehabilitation. Her name was Barbara Hari, and she was in Horicon, Wisconsin, and I called her and I said, Barbara, my name is Karen Becker, and I'm 14 years old, and I want to know how you became so successful. The long story short, she invited me to her home in Horicon, Wisconsin. She lives in a beautiful log cabin during the winter months, and she lives in a teepee on 13 acres during the summer months. She invited me to live in her teepee on her 13 acres and see how she rehabilitates hawks, eagles, owls, and falcons. Barbara has the best success rate in the country with raptors. And the reason she has such a success, she feeds biologically appropriate, raw, living mice, rabbits, rodents to those animals to be able to help the body recover from injury. So when I went to veterinary school years later, and I sat through these nutrition courses, and when they gave me the laminated chart that told me what food I should feed with what disease process, things did not add up.
Before I went to vet school, I worked for years in zoo medicine. The most important thing I think I've learned from that is every species has its own requirement. Each species must eat what it is supposed to eat. It's evolved to have a specific diet that keeps it healthy.
Each animal has its own biologic requirement for certain nutrients. A species-appropriate diet for worms is dirt. A species-appropriate diet, let's say for hummingbirds, would be nectar. You can't feed earthworms nectar and you can't feed hummingbirds dirt. Both of those animals would simply die. Some species, when you offer them not biologically appropriate foods, they simply won't consume them. When you offer a snake, another obligate carnivore, a salad, they will simply starve to death. They will not consume a non-biologically appropriate food in light of sustaining life. They simply die. It gets pretty confusing with dogs and cats, however, because dogs and cats are nutritionally much more resilient than other species. And what that means is that we can nutritionally abuse them, for lack of a better term, and they don't die immediately. They just have overall vitality decline and overall degenerative changes take place in their bodies from feeding them foods that are not biologically appropriate. Cats, being obligate carnivores, have to consume meat to be able to thrive. They do not have a biologic requirement for any type of carbohydrate. They have a very high protein requirement, a very high moisture requirement, and a moderate fat requirement. Cats originally, we thought, were domesticated to guard the granaries because cats don't consume grain. Cats consume mice that consume the grain, and so by domesticating cats, we assumed that there was a mutually beneficial relationship. We do know in the last 100 years, since we have produced cat foods on the market, that cats have experienced significantly more kidney disease, and we know that they have experienced obesity, organ failure, and diabetes at a much higher rate, and certainly we need to begin evaluating what role nutrition has in some of those degenerative diseases. Kidney disease is the #1 killer of cats, and we know that asking cats to process an entirely dehydrated food, such as kibble, can be very detrimental to kidney health. Dogs evolved from the gray wolf, and we know that dogs came phylogenetically out of the order Carnivora, which means they're carnivores. In 1993, the International Society of Zoologic Nomenclature redefined Canis lupus familiaris as just Canis lupus. These are the people that define what category, what taxonomy animals fit into and why. This society concluded that dogs were genetically identical to wolves. They shared 99.9% of the DNA. We know that genotypically, the genotype, the DNA is identical. What has changed over the last 200 to 400 years is the phenotype. Phenotype is the jacket, which is what pets look like. We have bald dogs, dogs with white fluffy hair, blue eyes, dogs with crazy tufts of hair on their body and no hair anywhere else, speckled dogs, short-legged dogs, double-coated dogs. We've created these fantastic varieties of breeds because we like diversity in what we see. Despite the fact that we have bred dogs to have certain characteristics, we have not bred out of them their Canis lupus DNA. So yes, just as you can have brown hair, blonde hair, or you can have blue eyes, green eyes, brown eyes, your nutritional requirements as a human being remain the same, despite the fact that you look vastly different depending on what your DNA dictates.
One of the biggest problems with the pet food industry is there has been very poor research done into what actually is appropriate and isn't appropriate. There isn't anybody that's really minding the store and saying, here, we really know that this is needed for pet food.
The major companies criticize raw diets, warning consumers against the hazards of feeding raw meat to pets, claiming it can make your animals sick. However, those companies who repeatedly criticize feeding a raw diet have yet to produce a single study to provide any substantial evidence to support their claims.
The problem with the types of research studies that you are describing, they would go at least 7 to 8 to 10 years in length before you would get a definitive answer. Within our legal requirements and frameworks, it's not FDA's responsibility to do such studies.
The research has not been done on raw foods, not because there isn't an interest, but because the $1 million it takes to fund that particular research simply isn't there. Now, integrative veterinarians are working on that, but traditional veterinarians will say, until we see the research, we're not interested in recommending this particular food for dog and cat owners. We just don't believe it's safe and healthy. The frustration is that we don't have clinically proven research demonstrating that dry and canned foods are wildly helpful for pets as well.
The larger corporations are not very interested in proving or disproving the value of their food because they're already making $1 billion on it, and there's no reason to do that research.
Since major pet food companies are involved with and have influence over vet students, lack of education surrounding raw diets exists heavily among traditional vets.
When clients come to veterinarians who have not been educated about raw foods at all and say, I'm considering feeding my pets raw meat, of course the logical conclusion is, why?
There's a lot of bacteria in the raw diets, and it's kind of a ticking time clock.
You could harm them, or why would you do that, or it's risky.
I think raw food has too much of a potential for negative side effects that it's just not worth it.
People's biggest question is there could be pathogens or bacteria, parasites within the food that could cause illness to pets.
When dogs eat raw diets, their feces, their poop, has a lot of bacteria.
Let's talk about eating shit. Dogs, if given the opportunity, will eat poop. We tend to look the other way when dogs do this. Dogs lick their butts. Dogs do a variety of behaviors that if humans or other animals were to do it, we would die. Dogs and cats, being carnivores, are equipped to be able to process their evolutionary food source, which is raw meat. All of their digestion has acclimated and has evolved to be able to process whole, living, unadulterated protein. So from ripping and tearing, their dentition is set up to be able to process meat. Their stomach acid is very acidic, in fact a pH of 1, which is highly acidic. That stomach acid is in place to be able to neutralize pathogens or potential harmful bacteria that could be present in the food.